Your dead husband had terrible taste." The pawnshop owner's grin widened as he held the heavy gold ring between two fingers, letting it dangle under the fluorescent light like it was nothing more than cheap scrap. Across the counter, Evelyn Mercer's breath caught in her throat. Her wrinkled hands trembled against the glass. "Best I can do is $5, Leonard Dawson said, enjoying the way the words landed. "Honestly, ma'am, I'm being generous." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. $5 for the ring Caleb had worn for almost 20 years, for the only thing she had left from the man who built her house with his own hands, for the last promise he ever made. Her lips parted, but before she could answer, a deep voice from behind her cut through the shop like a blade. "That ring is priceless." The entire pawn shop went silent. Evelyn slowly turned. The biker standing 3 steps behind her had been waiting quietly near the military display case, an old metal box in one hand. Tall, broad-shouldered, gray beard cut close, black leather vest stretched over a frame that age had not softened nearly enough. His pale eyes weren't on Leonard. They were locked on the ring, and in those eyes was something far heavier than surprise. Recognition. Leonard scoffed. "Mind your own damn business." The biker stepped forward. "No," he said calmly. "I think this just became my business." The words hit the room with the kind of quiet authority that made even men like Leonard Dawson hesitate. Evelyn looked between them, confused, heart still pounding from the insult. Outside, the November wind rattled the shop window. Inside, the weight of what had almost happened began pressing down on her chest, because 5 minutes earlier she had been ready to let it go, ready to trade the last piece of Caleb for 5 wrinkled dollar bills, ready to go home and try to save a house that was already beginning to collapse around her. The storm last night had nearly finished what time had started. At 78, Evelyn had spent the whole morning moving pots and buckets beneath fresh leaks in the ceiling. Rainwater had dripped through the cracked roof in steady, cruel rhythms. By sunrise, part of the hallway ceiling had caved in. Wet plaster covered the floorboards Caleb had laid in the summer of 1972, when his hands were strong and his laugh filled every room of the farmhouse. The west wall was leaning now. The porch steps had sunk. The old support beam in the attic had split clean down the middle. Another storm, and the house would start folding in on itself. And the cruelest part was that the house wasn't just wood. It was Caleb. Every board, every nail, every crooked doorway he swore he'd fix someday. Selling the ring had felt like betrayal. But losing the house felt worse. So she had driven into town in her rattling pickup with the velvet pouch tucked inside her coat pocket, praying the ring might buy enough lumber to hold winter off one more season. Instead, she got Leonard Dawson, a man who had spent 20 years smiling at desperate people while stealing the value from the things they loved most. Now he glared at the biker. "You got some kind of appraisal license?" Leonard snapped. The biker ignored him. He extended his hand toward Evelyn. "May I?" Something in his voice made her trust him before she understood why. She nodded. He lifted the ring carefully from Leonard's fingers. Not like jewelry, not like money, like memory, like history. The moment he turned it over, his entire expression changed. The skull insignia engraved on the face of the ring caught the fluorescent light. Then, the date beneath it. 1971. His thumb froze over the inner band where a second engraving had nearly vanished with age. A founder's mark. A mark only a handful of men had ever worn. For a long second, nobody moved. Then he looked up at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "who did this belong to?" "My husband." Her voice came softer now, almost protective. The biker's jaw tightened. "What was his name?" She swallowed. "Caleb Mercer." The metal box in his other hand slipped slightly in his grip. For the first time since he'd spoken, the man looked genuinely shaken. Leonard frowned, suddenly less confident. "Who the hell is that supposed to be?" The biker turned his head slowly toward him. Even his silence felt dangerous. Then his eyes returned to Evelyn. "Caleb Mercer," he repeated, almost to himself, "founder of the First County Charter." Evelyn stared. The words barely registered. Founder. No one had called Caleb that in decades. After the highway crash 36 years ago, the club vanished from her life almost overnight. Men stopped coming around. The noise of engines faded. His old brothers disappeared into distance, prison, graves, or silence. All she had left was the farmhouse and the ring. The biker exhaled slowly, still staring at it. "I came in here to buy back my dead brother's silver star medal," he said, lifting the tarnished box in his left hand. "Somebody pawned it after he died." His eyes met hers. "But this," he looked down at the ring again, "this is older than any medal in this building." Leonard tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "It's still just gold." The biker's stare cut into him. "No," he said coldly. "It's legacy." Then he turned fully to Evelyn, voice lowering with respect. "You almost sold the founder's ring of this chapter for $5. A tear slipped down her cheek. She looked at the ring, suddenly no longer seeing Caleb's hand. She saw what he had built, what he had been, what she had nearly let a greedy man erase. The biker closed his fingers around the ring carefully and said the words that changed everything. "Ma'am, I think your husband built the club I led today." The biker's face went cold the second he heard the name. For a long moment, the pawn shop disappeared around him. No dusty guitars, no cracked glass displays, no Leonard Dawson nervously shifting behind the counter. There was only the ring in his palm, heavy, worn smooth by decades, and the name echoing through his head like thunder from another lifetime. Caleb Mercer. The man every rider in the county still spoke about in lowered voices. The man who had built the first Hells Angels charter here in 1971 out of 6, broke veterans, one abandoned garage, and a code of loyalty that outlived half the men who swore it. And now his widow had almost traded that legacy for $5. The biker slowly looked up at Evelyn Mercer. Her eyes were wet, not from greed, not from value, from grief, from the kind of exhaustion that came from choosing between memory and survival. He had seen that look before, usually in war widows, gold star mothers, brothers standing over caskets, people forced to put a price on something that should never have had one. His voice softened. "How bad is the house?" Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by the question. "The west beam split last night," she admitted. "Roof's leaking, porch is sinking, another storm, and I don't know if it'll stand through winter." The biker nodded once, jaw tightening. Leonard tried to regain control. "So what?" he snapped. "It's still just an old ring. Sentimental value doesn't pay market price." The biker turned, and for the first time, Leonard Dawson understood he had badly misread the room. The man's pale eyes had changed, not anger, something heavier, authority. "You ever seen one of these before?" the biker asked. He held the ring up so the fluorescent light hit the founder skull insignia dead center. Leonard crossed his arms, trying to recover his smugness. "Looks like tacky biker jewelry." The biker's lip twitched. "Wrong." He rotated the band, revealing the hidden engraving inside. FC, 1971. Leonard frowned. The biker spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Founder's Circle." His thumb brushed over the engraving with almost ceremonial care. "Only chapter founders ever wore these. No vice presidents, no captains, no patched members, just the men who built the charter from dirt." Evelyn stared at the ring like she was seeing it for the first time. Caleb had never talked much about club hierarchy. At home, he was never the founder. He was the man who fixed gutters in the rain, burned toast every Sunday, and kissed her forehead before every road trip. But now the object in the biker's hand seemed to carry a weight she had never fully understood. Leonard scoffed again, weaker this time. "Even if that's true, gold is gold." The biker stepped closer to the counter, close enough that Leonard instinctively leaned back. "Gold?" he said quietly. "This ring isn't valuable because of gold." He pointed toward the skull insignia. "This mark is hand-cut silver inlaid into black gold. Old custom forge work from the Oakland chapter's first armorer. That kind of craftsmanship doesn't exist anymore." Then his eyes met Leonard's. "And the man who wore it founded everything my brothers and I stand on." The pawn shop had gone dead silent. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights suddenly felt louder. Evelyn's fingers trembled against the glass. All morning she had walked around with the shame of needing help. Now that shame was being replaced by something stranger. Pride. The biker gently placed the ring into her palm. "You keep this safe." She looked at him confused. "But I need the money." His eyes flicked to the old military metal box still sitting beside the register. The reason he had walked in here at all. A tarnished silver star that once belonged to his dead brother Mason, killed in Afghanistan 19 years ago. He had come to buy it back before it disappeared into another collector's vault. Memory mattered. That was why he had come. And maybe that was why fate had placed him here now. He picked up the metal box with one hand and looked back at Evelyn. "What's your estimate for the repairs?" Her voice barely held. "I was told 8,000, maybe 10 if the foundation's worse than it looks." Leonard let out a laugh, trying one last time to humiliate her. "Well, unless that dead husband of yours is coming back from the grave, that ring still won't buy you a house." The biker slowly turned his head. This time, the room temperature seemed to drop. Evelyn saw it, the subtle shift, the stillness. The same kind of stillness Caleb used to get before men made very bad decisions around him. The biker stepped toward Leonard until only the counter separated them. "You keep insulting dead men whose names built this town," he said quietly, "and one day you're going to say it to the wrong brother." Leonard swallowed. The biker looked back to Evelyn, and his voice softened again. "My name is Roman Cade." The name hit like a shockwave. Even Leonard's face drained, because everybody in 3 counties knew that name. Roman Cade, current president, Hell's Angels, the man who had turned the fractured remains of the county charter back into the most respected chapter in the state. Evelyn stared at him. "You're the president?" He gave a small nod. "The same club your husband built." Her hand tightened around the ring. For 36 years she had believed Caleb's world died with him. Now it was standing right in front of her, alive, breathing, still loyal. Roman looked at the water stains on her sleeve, at the exhaustion in her posture, at the dignity she had somehow kept even in humiliation. Then he said the words that shifted the story forever. "Ma'am, before this day is over, I'm coming to see that house myself." Roman Cade knew the house was bad before he even stepped out of his truck. The moment he turned onto the dirt road behind Evelyn's rattling pickup, he saw it. The farmhouse leaned slightly to the west, just enough for a trained eye to know the support structure was failing. The porch sagged in the middle. One shutter hung by a single rusted hinge. Sections of the roof looked darker where rainwater had soaked through the old shingles. But what hit him hardest wasn't the damage. It was the bones of the place, the wide front porch, the hand-cut cedar beams, the garage off to the side with its oversized double doors. Roman had seen this house before, not with his own eyes. In photographs, old black and white prints in the clubhouse archives, Caleb Mercer standing shirtless on the porch in 1972, hammer in hand, surrounded by the first 6 founding brothers. They had built this house together, brotherhood weekends, beer on the hood of old trucks, engines running in the yard. The first chapter rides launching from this exact driveway. Roman killed the engine. For a second, he just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring. History wasn't supposed to rot like this. Evelyn opened the truck door slowly and stepped down. She looked embarrassed. Roman hated that. People who carried legacy should never have to look ashamed for surviving. "I know it's a mess," she said softly. Roman stepped onto the porch. The middle board dipped under his boot with a groan. Not a mess, a crisis. He crouched, running a hand across the cracked timber beam beneath the steps. Termite damage, water rot, years of postponed repairs. The roof above them gave off a slow, hollow drip where rainwater still leaked into a metal bucket by the door. "How long's it been like this?" Roman asked. Evelyn hesitated. "The porch. Maybe 3 winters. Roof got bad after last spring's storm, but the west support beam cracked last night." Roman's jaw flexed. 3 winters. She'd been living inside a collapsing founder house for years, alone, while the chapter rode memorial routes and told Caleb Mercer stories over whiskey without ever once asking where his widow had gone. A flicker of guilt passed through him. That ended now. He followed her inside. The smell of damp wood and old memories filled every room. A bucket sat in the hallway beneath a steady drip. Part of the guest room ceiling had collapsed inward, plaster scattered over faded floral wallpaper. The living room still held traces of Caleb. A framed black and white photo above the fireplace, 6 men in leather, 1 woman on the porch smiling behind them. Roman stepped closer. There he was. Caleb Mercer. younger than Roman had ever imagined him, broad, hard-eyed, one arm around Evelyn's waist, and on his right hand the founder ring, the exact same ring now resting in Evelyn's coat pocket. Roman stared at the photo longer than he meant to. "You still kept all this?" Evelyn's voice came quiet from behind him. "He built every wall in this place." She stepped beside him. Her fingers touched the photo frame. "He said if he ever died on the road, this house would keep a part of him alive." Roman swallowed. Because Caleb had been right. Even half-rotten, the place still carried him. The beams, the garage, the scent of cedar and oil that somehow still lingered near the mudroom. Outside, the wind pressed against the siding, making the whole west wall creak. Roman looked toward it. That wall wasn't surviving another storm. He walked into the kitchen. The cabinets were handmade, old pine, same style as the workshop shelves in the original clubhouse. Caleb's fingerprints were everywhere in this place. Roman turned to Evelyn. "You should have called the chapter." A sad smile touched her lips. "After the crash, no one came anymore." The words hit harder than Leonard's insult ever could. Roman felt it like a blade between the ribs, not anger, shame, because she wasn't wrong. The old generation had died, disappeared, or scattered. New presidents came, new brothers, new priorities. And somehow the widow of the founder became just another forgotten woman in an old house at the edge of town. Roman exhaled slowly. "That's on us." Evelyn looked surprised by the honesty. Roman stepped toward the split west beam visible through the kitchen doorway. He pressed a hand against it. The wood gave under his fingers. Soft, dead. This house wasn't days from collapse. It was hours from disaster if winter winds picked up. Evelyn's voice trembled. "That's why I went to the pawn shop." Roman turned. She pulled the velvet pouch from her coat, then slowly tipped the founder ring into her palm. Gold caught the late afternoon light from the broken blinds. For a second, the room went silent around it. "I was ready to let it go," she whispered, "but if you hadn't been there," her eyes lifted to his, "I'd have gone home with $5 and still lost the house." Roman looked at the ring, then at the walls Caleb built, then back at the widow who had protected his memory for 36 years. He shook his head. "No." His voice came low, absolute. "You're not losing this house." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the fields. Another storm coming. Roman already knew what had to happen. Not repairs, not patchwork, a full rebuild, a chapter ride, lumber, roofing crews, concrete, brothers on every inch of this land. He looked once more at the founder photo, then back at Evelyn, and said the line that would change her life by morning. "Ma'am, by tomorrow this place won't belong to the storm anymore. It'll belong to the club again." The storm came back that night like it had something personal against the Mercer house. Rain slammed against the windows. Wind tore through the fields hard enough to make the old siding shudder. Every groan in the walls sounded like a warning. Evelyn sat in Caleb's old armchair, the founder ring warm in her hand, staring at the front window where Roman Cade's taillights had disappeared less than an hour earlier. Part of her still didn't believe what had happened. A few hours ago, she had been standing in Leonard Dawson's pawn shop, humiliated, ready to sell the last piece of Caleb for $5. Now the current president of the club Caleb built had stood in her kitchen and promised the house would survive. Promises were dangerous at her age. They carried memory, hope, and hope hurt when it failed. Another violent gust hit the west wall. A crack split through the hallway plaster. Evelyn flinched, then came the sound. Far off at first, low, deep, familiar. A distant thunder that had nothing to do with clouds. Her breath caught. Motorcycles, not one, not two, dozens. The sound grew louder, rolling across the dark fields like an approaching storm of its own. Headlights began cutting through the rain outside her front window, white beams sweeping across the sagging porch, then red taillights, then more and more. By the time Evelyn reached the front door, the entire yard glowed with reflected chrome and rainwater. Harleys, at least 20, maybe more. The engines idled in a slow synchronized rumble that shook the porch boards beneath her slippers. Roman swung off the lead bike first. Rain rolled off his shoulders as he pulled off his gloves. Behind him came brothers of every age, gray-bearded veterans, younger patched riders, men in work jackets over cuts, one towing a flatbed trailer stacked with lumber and roofing tarps. Another truck pulled in behind them, loaded with support beams, concrete bags, tool chests, portable floodlights, generators. Evelyn just stood frozen in the doorway. Roman stepped onto the porch, boots splashing through pooled rain. "I told you," he said over the thunder of engines. "By tomorrow this house belongs to the club again." The words hit her harder than the cold wind. For 36 years she had listened to storms alone. Tonight, the storm had to fight through 20 brothers first. Roman turned to the men behind him. "No patches in the mud," he barked. "Tarps over the west wall first. Reinforce the porch supports before midnight. Nobody leaves till this roof stops bleeding." The response came instantly. Not chaos. Precision. Brothers moved like a practiced construction crew. 2 men were already unloading beams. 3 more hauled ladders through the rain. Someone fired up the floodlights, turning the yard bright as day. A pair of younger riders sprinted toward the west wall carrying heavy-duty tarps. Evelyn watched in disbelief as the field around her home transformed into a living machine of steel, boots, and brotherhood. Then Roman looked back at her. "You should be inside." She shook her head slowly. "No." Her voice trembled. "I waited 36 years to hear engines in this driveway again." For the first time that night, Roman smiled. A real one. Then his eyes dropped to the ring still in her hand. The Founder's Ring. Rain shimmered in the black gold. Evelyn looked down at it too, then back at the men working through the storm, at Roman, at the club her husband gave his life building. A thought came to her with sudden clarity. She stepped closer and gently held the ring out toward him. Roman's smile disappeared. "Ma'am," her voice came soft but certain, "if you hadn't walked into that pawn shop, I would have sold Caleb's legacy for $5. Roman didn't move. She pushed the ring slightly closer. "But because of you, his house still stands tonight." Roman slowly shook his head. "No, that belongs with you." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "It belongs with the men who still remember what he built." The rain hammered harder on the porch roof. Behind Roman, brothers lifted the first temporary support beam into place against the sinking west wall. The whole house groaned. Time was running out. Evelyn's voice broke. "Please." Roman stared at the ring, at the founder skull, at the engraved 1971. At the sacred symbol every president after Caleb had grown up hearing stories about. He had spent his whole life protecting the chapter. And now, the chapter's first true relic was being handed back by the widow who had protected it through widowhood, poverty, storms, and silence. Slowly, carefully, Roman extended his hand. The Founder's Ring dropped into his palm. The weight of it seemed to settle into the entire night. No one spoke. Even the brothers in the yard seemed quieter somehow, sensing the gravity of what had just happened. Roman closed his fingers around it. His voice came low. "I'll put this where every brother sees it." Evelyn nodded through tears. "That's where Caleb would have wanted it." A shout came from the west side of the house. "President, beam's about to give." Roman's head snapped toward the sound. Instantly he moved. He turned, barking orders into the rain. 3 more supports on the west frame. Mason, get the jack under the porch line. Nobody lets this wall drop." Brothers ran. Floodlights swung. Mud splashed. The storm screamed. And in the center of it all, Roman Cade stepped into the rain with the Founder's Ring clenched in his fist like a sacred oath. Tonight they weren't just saving a house, they were restoring a legacy. And before dawn, every man in that yard would know exactly whose widow they were fighting for. By 4:30 a.m., the Mercer house was still standing. Barely. Rainwater still dripped from the far end of the roof, but the west wall no longer leaned. Fresh support beams now held it in place like the steady hands of old brothers refusing to let history collapse. The storm had finally moved east. The sky over the fields was turning the color of wet steel. Floodlights still burned in the mud. Generators hummed. Boots crunched over soaked gravel and broken porch boards. And in the middle of it all, Roman Cade stood beneath the half-open garage awning with the Founder's Ring in his hand. He had not put it in his pocket. Not once. The weight of it felt too sacred for that. Behind him, two younger patched riders rolled open the back doors of the chapter truck, revealing a black steel display case wrapped in moving blankets. Evelyn stood in the doorway with a wool blanket over her shoulders, watching every movement with silent disbelief. Roman turned to her. "We're taking it to the clubhouse this morning." Her eyes flickered to the ring. A strange sadness touched her face, not regret, just the ache of finally letting go. Roman noticed. He stepped toward her. "It's not leaving you," he said quietly. "It's coming home." The word settled into her chest. For the first time since Caleb died, that word didn't mean just the farmhouse. It meant what he had built, the chapter, the brothers, the legacy still breathing in engines and oath-bound men. She nodded slowly. Roman signaled to the men near the truck. The steel case was carried out carefully and set on a folding table beneath the garage light. When the blankets came off, even the younger riders fell silent. Black velvet interior, tempered glass, steel frame bolted to a granite base, a memorial plaque already mounted beneath the display cradle. Roman stared at it. Someone had worked fast during the storm. The inscription read, "Founder's Ring, Caleb Mercer, 1971, returned by his widow." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment she couldn't breathe. 36 years of silence, 36 years of storms. And now Caleb's name stood carved in steel and stone before sunrise. Roman carefully placed the ring inside the velvet cradle. The skull insignia caught the pale blue light of dawn. The black gold shimmered like it had been waiting for this exact place all along. One of the older riders, Boone, removed his cap. Then another. Then every brother in the yard did the same. Even the youngest patched prospect bowed his head. Roman's voice carried low and steady through the cold morning air. "Every man here rides because Caleb Mercer and 6 others built this charter from dirt, blood, and loyalty." The brothers listened in complete silence. Roman glanced toward Evelyn. For 36 years his widow protected the last symbol of that beginning, while the rest of us forgot where our road started. A flicker of shame passed through several older faces. Good. They needed to feel it. Roman's voice hardened. "That ends today." A murmur of agreement rolled through the men. Then Boone stepped forward. 70 if he was a day. White beard, scar through one eyebrow. His voice came rough. "I rode with Caleb in 79. Evelyn's eyes widened. Boone looked at her with something like sorrow. "We should have found you sooner." Her lips trembled, but before she could answer, Roman raised his hand. No more looking backward. His gaze moved from the display case to the half-destroyed house, then to the men, then to the loaded trailers still stacked with lumber. "We honor founders by protecting what they built." He pointed toward the house. "That means this." The men turned as one. Roman's next words landed like an order and an oath at the same time. "We're not patching this place." His eyes lifted to the cracked roofline. "We rebuild it." That hit different. Even the younger guys straightened. Not emergency repairs, not storm tarps, a full chapter rebuild, the kind of thing legends were made from. Boone cracked a grin. "Thought you'd say that." Roman stepped toward the center of the yard. Morning light was breaking over the fields now, washing the soaked property in pale gold. He raised his voice. "By tonight I want new roof frame porch, stripped west wall, rebuilt foundation crew here by noon, windows measured, full material convoy from the chapter warehouse." The brothers erupted into motion instantly. No hesitation. Some sprinted for the trucks, others grabbed coffee thermoses and tool belts. Engines roared back to life as riders peeled out toward town for lumber shingles, drywall, concrete, plumbing supplies. The farmhouse yard transformed from disaster site into a command center. Evelyn watched it all with tears in her eyes. Then she looked at the display case, at Caleb's ring, at his name, at the brothers moving through the dawn like soldiers rebuilding a kingdom. Roman stepped beside her quietly. "This ring stays where every brother sees it." She nodded, then looked toward the house. "And Caleb's home?" Roman's eyes followed hers. His answer came with absolute certainty. "By the time the next storm comes, it'll be stronger than the day he built it." In the distance, another line of Harleys appeared on the road. More brothers, more trucks, more tools. The chapter wasn't just coming, It was mobilizing, and by sunset, the whole county would know the founder's widow had been forgotten far too long. By sunrise, the Mercer property looked less like a disaster zone and more like the heart of a military operation. Harleys lined both sides of the dirt road for nearly a quarter-mile. Pickup trucks, flatbeds, tool trailers, portable generators, stacks of lumber wrapped in plastic, pallets of shingles, concrete bags covered beneath tarps. Brothers moved through the mud with the kind of purpose that only came from shared loyalty and clear orders. The sound of hammers started before the sun fully cleared the fields. Metal ladders slammed into place against the farmhouse. Circular saws screamed. Men on the porch tore away rotten planks by hand, tossing them into a growing debris pile near the road. And in the middle of it all stood Evelyn Mercer, blankets still around her shoulders, unable to fully process what she was seeing. Her home had not felt alive like this in 36 years. The last time this many men stood on the property, Caleb was still alive. Engines in the driveway, laughter in the garage, beer bottles on the porch railing. Brothers coming and going at all hours. Now, history was somehow repeating itself, only this time it had come to save what he left behind. Roman Cade stood near the chapter truck with a folded blueprint in one hand and a coffee thermos in the other. He had been awake all night, but there wasn't a trace of fatigue in his posture. Leaders didn't get tired while legacy was on the line. He pointed toward the west side of the house. Roof frame first, strip everything rotten to the studs. Mason team starts on the porch line after lunch. A chorus of, "Got it, Prez," answered back. Then Roman turned and saw Evelyn standing alone near the front steps. For a second, the chaos around them faded. He walked toward her. "You should be resting," she gave a weak smile. "I spent too many years watching this place fall apart." Her eyes moved across the yard. "I'm not missing the day it comes back." Roman followed her gaze. Two younger riders were hauling out the remains of Caleb's original porch beam. One of them paused. "Prez, look at this." The beam was older than anyone expected. Roman stepped closer. Hand-cut cedar, deep initials carved into the underside. CM plus EM, 1972. Evelyn's hand went to her mouth. Caleb had carved that the summer they finished the porch. He told her nobody would ever see it but the house itself. Now it lay exposed in morning light after surviving 54 years of storms. Roman ran a thumb over the initials, then looked at the men around him. "Save it." The younger rider blinked. "The whole beam?" Roman nodded. "It goes above the new fireplace." Evelyn's eyes filled instantly. This wasn't just rebuilding. They were preserving Caleb. Every salvaged board, every carved mark, every piece of him they could rescue. That changed the emotional weight of everything. The house wasn't being replaced. It was being reborn. A fresh wave of engines rolled up the road. 10 more Harleys, 2 cement trucks behind them. Then, a surprise Evelyn never expected. A white contractor van from Miller & Sons Construction, the biggest building company in the county. Roman saw her confusion. "I called in favors." The van door opened. Out stepped Hank Miller, 65, thick gloves, hard hat under one arm. The man froze when he saw Evelyn. "Mrs. Mercer?" She frowned, trying to place him. Then it hit her. "Hank? Caleb's garage apprentice?" He laughed once. "Was 17 when your husband taught me how to frame a wall straight." His eyes moved to the house. "Figured I owed him one." Roman smiled slightly. This was bigger than the chapter now. Caleb's legacy had roots all over the county. People were coming back. By mid-morning, the roof was gone, not collapsed, gone by design. Brothers stood balanced on exposed beams, replacing the rotten frame with fresh timber. The porch had been stripped clean. Concrete forms were being measured for new support posts. The whole front of the farmhouse now looked skeletal beneath the clear sky. But instead of fear, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. Then a young prospect jogged toward Roman from the road. "Prez." Roman turned. The kid's expression was tight. "There's a black Mercedes parked at the end of the property." Roman's eyes narrowed. Only one man in this county drove a black Mercedes with enough arrogance to pull up to a construction site uninvited. Leonard Dawson, the pawn shop owner. As if summoned by the thought, the car door opened. Leonard stepped out in polished shoes that sank immediately into the mud. His expensive coat looked ridiculous against the backdrop of Harleys and half-built scaffolding. He stared at the bikes, at the men, at the Founder display case visible through the open chapter truck. Then his eyes landed on Evelyn. A thin smile spread across his face. "Well," he said loudly, "looks like my little pawn deal turned into a community fundraiser." The yard went still. Hammers stopped. Saws powered down. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Roman slowly stepped away from the porch. The mud squelched beneath his boots. Leonard kept smiling. But for the first time since the pawn shop, that smile carried fear underneath. Because now he wasn't standing behind glass. He was standing on Caleb Mercer's land, surrounded by the club Caleb built. Roman stopped 10 feet in front of him, the entire property silent behind him. Then he said the one line that made Leonard's face pale. "You got a lot of nerve showing up on the Founder's porch." Leonard Dawson's smile cracked the moment Roman said it. For the first time since he stepped out of that black Mercedes, the pawnshop owner looked less like a predator and more like a man who suddenly realized he had walked into the wrong story. Mud soaked into his polished shoes. All around him, hammers had gone silent. Dozens of brothers stood frozen across the Mercer property, on ladders on the stripped roof frame, beside concrete forms around the salvaged porch beams. Every eye in the yard was now on him. Leonard tried to recover. He forced out a dry laugh. "Founder's porch? Come on, Roman, it's just an old house." The words hit the property like a slap. Roman didn't move. Behind him, Evelyn felt something shift in the air. It was the same feeling Caleb used to bring into a room before men learned very expensive lessons. Roman took one slow step forward. The mud gave under his boot with a wet crunch. "Just an old house?" he repeated. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. That was what made it dangerous. He pointed toward the half-rebuilt porch where Hank Miller and 3 brothers had just set the new support posts. "That porch was built by Caleb Mercer and the first 6 men who wore our patch in this county." Another step. "The west wall you nearly let his widow lose was framed with timber cut by hand in 1972. Another. "The beam inside that fireplace still carries his initials." Leonard's throat moved. He glanced around, at the bikes, at the men. At the chapter truck with the Founder ring sealed inside the display case. For the first time, the full weight of what he had tried to steal began landing on him. But Leonard Dawson had survived 20 years in business by turning shame into aggression, so he made the mistake Roman almost expected. He lifted his chin. "Well, she brought it to me willingly." A murmur rolled through the brothers. Wrong thing to say. Very wrong. Evelyn stepped forward before Roman could answer. Her blanket slipped from one shoulder, but her voice came steady. "No." The whole yard turned toward her. She stood straighter than she had in years. "You lied." Leonard blinked. Evelyn's eyes locked on his. "You called Caleb's ring biker junk." Her voice grew firmer. "You said my dead husband had terrible taste." A flicker of discomfort crossed several contractor faces nearby. Because now, this wasn't about a pawn disagreement. It was public humiliation, and everyone in the yard could see exactly what Leonard had done. Roman let the silence breathe. That was leadership too. Sometimes the truth did more damage when everyone heard it in the victim's own voice. Leonard tried one last pivot. "I made an offer based on scrap value." Roman's stare hardened. "And insulted the Founder's widow while doing it." That line landed. Hard. A couple of older riders on the scaffolding muttered curses under their breath. Boone climbed down from the ladder slowly, wiping sawdust from his beard, his scarred face twisted with disgust. "You said that to Evelyn Mercer?" Leonard took a half-step back. Boone had ridden with Caleb in the 70s. That was suddenly obvious in the look on his face. Roman didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't posture. He simply looked around at the yard, at the house, at the chapter in full rebuild motion. Then, back to Leonard. "You humiliated the Founder's widow over $5. The words echoed in the open morning air. Leonard's confidence was gone now. He glanced toward his Mercedes. Bad instinct. Half the brothers in the driveway now stood between him and the road without even realizing it. Roman saw it too, and almost smiled. Then Leonard made the second mistake. He pointed toward the chapter truck. "That ring still came through my shop," he said. "Legally, I can make a claim that it entered negotiation." Even the contractor stopped moving. Hank Miller muttered, "This guy's got a death wish." Roman's eyes turned to ice. Slowly, deliberately, he walked back to the truck and opened the rear display compartment. The founder ring sat under black velvet and glass, Caleb's name engraved beneath it in steel. Roman rested one hand on the case. "This ring was never sold," he turned back. "Not for $5? Not for $5 million. His voice deepened. "It was returned by the widow of the man who built this charter." That word, returned, stripped Leonard's legal angle apart in one sentence. He knew it. The brothers knew it. And now the contractors and county witnesses knew it too. Leonard's face flushed. Roman stepped away from the truck. "You know what Caleb used to say about men who lie to widows?" Leonard said nothing. Roman's voice lowered. He said rotten wood always collapses under its own weight. The line hit harder than a threat, because Leonard could now see the entire metaphor around him. The Mercer house was being rebuilt. His own pawn reputation was starting to splinter, publicly, in front of contractors, county crews, local witnesses, 30 patched brothers. This was humiliation reversed, the exact same thing he had tried to do inside his shop. Now it was happening to him in open daylight. Leonard swallowed. Then, without another word, he turned and slogged back toward the Mercedes through 6 inches of mud. No one stopped him. They didn't need to. The silence following him back to the car was worse than violence. His polished shoes were ruined, his coat splashed. His dignity left somewhere between Caleb's porch and the driveway. Roman watched him go, then turned back to the house, to the lumber, to the men, to Evelyn. And this time, his voice carried across the entire yard. "All right, brothers, let's finish rebuilding what he started." The property erupted back into motion. Saws roared, hammers slammed, concrete poured, and for the first time in decades, Caleb Mercer's house was no longer surviving. It was rising. By noon, half the county had heard what happened at Caleb Mercer's house. That was the thing about small towns. A man could lie in private, but humiliation in public spread faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the time the second cement truck rolled off the Mercer Road, people were already talking. Leonard Dawson tried to scam an old widow. The ring belonged to the founder, Roman Cade himself, called him out in the mud. The whole chapter was rebuilding the founder's home. And Leonard Dawson was not the kind of man who could survive public embarrassment quietly. That became clear 40 minutes later. A sheriff's SUV rolled onto the property, then another, then a county inspection truck. The sound of hammers slowed. Roman looked up from the porch framing. He already knew Leonard's revenge wouldn't come with fists, it would come through paperwork. Deputy Collins stepped out first, mid-50s, a local who knew better than to act arrogant around 30 patched bikers with nail guns and concrete mixers. Still, his badge gave him just enough courage to walk forward. "Roman," Roman climbed down from the porch beam. "What is it?" Collins cleared his throat. "Anonymous complaint says this rebuild doesn't have permits." A low murmur spread through the yard. Roman's expression didn't change, but Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Of course Leonard would do this. He couldn't steal the ring. So now he was trying to stop the house. Roman took the folded permit folder from the work table and handed it over. "Foundation permit filed this morning." Then another. "Structural reinforcement permit." Then another. "Emergency storm stabilization authorization signed by Hank Miller." Collins flipped through them. His brows lifted. Everything was clean, stamped, legal, filed before sunrise. Roman had expected sabotage. That was leadership too. Leonard wasn't the first rotten man he'd ever had to stay 3 moves ahead of. The county inspector stepped out of his truck next. Older woman, hard eyes, clipboard under one arm. She scanned the site, certified contractor crews, safety cones, utility shutoffs, proper load support, structural bracing. Then she looked at Hank Miller. "Hank?" He lifted a gloved hand. "Morning, Susan." Her entire posture changed. Hank Miller's company practically built half the county. If he signed off, the job was real. The inspector nodded once. "Looks good to me." That should have ended it, but Leonard Dawson was desperate now, and desperate men rarely stopped after the first failed attack. A black Mercedes came tearing up the dirt road so fast it fishtailed in the gravel. The whole property turned. Leonard stepped out before the engine even stopped, face red, tie crooked. Humiliation had finally boiled into anger. "This is illegal," he shouted. Nobody moved. The entire chapter just watched him self-destruct. He pointed at the house. "At best, this place should have been condemned. She can't afford this, so who's paying?" Roman's stare stayed level. "The club," Leonard laughed bitterly. "That's not charity, that's intimidation." Boone stepped off the ladder holding a framing hammer. "No," he growled, "that's loyalty." Leonard ignored him, his eyes locked on Evelyn. "This widow walks into my shop with no money, no options, and suddenly by lunch she's got contractors, cement trucks, and half the Hells Angels on her lawn?" His voice rose. "You expect this town to believe that?" Evelyn stepped forward before Roman answered. This time there was no tremble in her posture, no shame, no desperation, just dignity. "My husband built half the men standing on this property," she said. Leonard went quiet. Her voice carried across the site. "You saw an old woman and thought you could steal the last thing he left me." The county inspector lowered her clipboard. Deputy Collins folded his arms. Even the contractors had stopped pretending to work. Now, Leonard's second humiliation was happening in front of law enforcement, county officials, local contractors, the founder's widow. The club Roman stepped beside Evelyn. His voice came calm. "You had your chance to walk away." Leonard's jaw flexed. Then he made the biggest mistake yet. He pointed toward the display case in the chapter truck. "That ring belongs in a museum, not with criminals." The temperature on the property seemed to drop. Roman's eyes slowly turned toward the case, then back to Leonard. "Careful." One word, low, controlled, dangerous. Leonard realized it too late. He hadn't just insulted the club, he insulted Caleb, the founder, the man whose house he stood on. Roman stepped closer until Leonard instinctively retreated into the mud. "That ring belongs exactly where loyalty still means something." The line hit every man on the property. Even Deputy Collins looked away. Because everybody knew Roman was right. Museums stored objects. The club protected legacy. Then the county inspector finally spoke. "Mr. Dawson." Leonard turned. Her expression was flat. "I've had 4 elderly fraud complaints tied to your shop this year." The silence that followed was devastating. Leonard stared. The inspector continued. "I think it's time we open those files again." His face drained. This was no longer about the Mercer house. His own rotten foundation had cracked. Exactly like Roman said, rotten wood always collapsed. The deputies stepped closer. Not an arrest, not yet, but enough to make it clear. The county smelled blood now. Leonard looked around the property one last time. At the house rising, at the founder's ring, at Evelyn no longer afraid, at Roman standing immovable in Caleb's yard. Then he backed toward the Mercedes. The second public humiliation in one day had finished what the first one started. His business was starting to collapse, and he knew it. Roman watched him leave, then turned to the men. The roof frame was nearly done. The porch posts were set. Concrete was curing. This house would make it through winter. But now something bigger had started. The town itself was finally looking at the founder's forgotten widow. And by tonight, everybody would know exactly whose legacy was rising from this dirt. By evening, the Mercer rebuild had become the only thing anyone in town was talking about. The story spread from diner booths to gas stations, from the hardware store to the sheriff's office. By sunset, people were repeating the same version in different voices. A greedy pawn owner tried to cheat an old widow out of a priceless founder's ring. The current Hells Angels president exposed him. The founder's house was being rebuilt by the entire chapter. And now, Leonard Dawson was under county fraud review. For the first time in years, Caleb Mercer's name was alive in town again. And that changed everything. The first civilians arrived just before dark. An elderly couple in an old Ford pickup. Then, a waitress from Rosie's Diner carrying foil trays of hot food. Then, 3 teenagers from the high school auto shop with tool belts and eager faces. Roman noticed it immediately. This had moved beyond the club. Legacy was pulling the town in. Evelyn stood near the new porch steps, wrapped in a clean jacket one of the brothers had brought from town. She watched in disbelief as people she hadn't seen in years walked up her driveway with casseroles, extension cords, blankets, work gloves, coffee, old photographs of Caleb. One old mechanic named Frank approached her with trembling hands. "I worked under your husband in '74, he said, handing her a faded black and white photo. Evelyn took it carefully. The image showed Caleb in the original clubhouse garage, sleeves rolled up, smiling over the hood of an old shovelhead. 5 younger men stood behind him. One of them was unmistakably Roman's father, another was Boone. The years seemed to collapse in her hands. Roman stepped beside her. "This is what legacy does," he said quietly. She looked around the property, at the floodlights, at the nearly rebuilt roofline, at the line of town vehicles now parked beside the Harleys, and for the first time in decades, she no longer felt forgotten. Then came the sound of a news van. A local station truck rolled onto the edge of the property. A young reporter stepped out, eyes wide at the scale of what was happening. Roman almost told them to leave. Then he looked at the founder's house, at the brothers, at the town finally waking up. No, people needed to see this. The reporter approached carefully. "Mr. Cade, is it true this all started because of a pawnshop scam?" Roman's expression stayed level. "It started because a widow was about to lose her home. The cameras rolled. That line would be everywhere by morning." Then the reporter turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Mercer, how does it feel seeing this happen?" Her eyes drifted across the rebuilt west wall, the new porch frame, the restored cedar beam with CM plus EM 1972 carved into it, then to the chapter truck where Caleb's ring sat beneath glass. Her voice came soft. "It feels like my husband finally came home." The entire site went quiet. Even the cameraman lowered his eyes for a moment. That line hit everyone, Roman especially, because he knew exactly what the town would hear in it. Not biker myth, not outlaw legend, not fear, just love. And memory. And loyalty, outliving death. As darkness settled in, floodlights illuminated the finished roof frame. The house now stood straighter than it had that morning. Fresh lumber glowed pale against the old structure. The porch foundation was reset. The west wall no longer groaned. This was no longer emergency repair. It was resurrection. Then, Deputy Collins's SUV returned, this time without tension. He stepped out holding a folder. Roman walked over. Collins handed it to him. County Fraud Division opened the Dawson case. Roman opened the file. Inside, elderly underpayment complaints forged appraisal discrepancies, switched gemstones illegal scrap gold reporting. Boone whistled low. The whole rotten structure of Leonard's business was finally splitting open. Collins glanced toward Evelyn. 3 more widows came forward after the news van aired the first segment. That hit hard. Leonard hadn't just tried to scam Evelyn. He had built his business on humiliating the desperate. Roman closed the file. The line from earlier echoed in his head. Rotten wood always collapses under its own weight. Now it was happening in real time. Near 9 p.m., a black Mercedes crawled past the road entrance again. Slow. No confidence this time. Leonard didn't stop, didn't get out. He just stared through the driver's side window at the rebuilt house the town gathered on Caleb's land. The floodlit founder displayed the chapter, the sheriff presents the cameras. His own public collapse was complete. Roman met his stare from across the yard, didn't move, didn't blink. Leonard drove on. No one watched him leave. Because by then, he no longer mattered. The story was bigger than him now. This was about the founder, his widow, and the town finally remembering who built its backbone. Roman turned toward the house. The contractors were finishing the window framing. Hank Miller approached with the final revised plans. "By tomorrow evening," Hank said, "we can start interior restoration." Roman nodded. Good. Because he wanted more than safety now. He wanted beauty. A house Caleb would recognize. A home worthy of the woman who protected his ring through 36 winters. Roman looked at Evelyn, at the way she touched the old photo in her hands, at the tears that now came from gratitude instead of fear. Then he made the next promise. "Tomorrow we rebuild the inside, and when we're done, this place won't just survive winter. It'll outlive all of us." The next morning, The Mercer house no longer looked wounded. It looked unfinished, and there was a big difference. Wounded meant loss. Unfinished meant promise. Sunlight poured through the new window frames, cutting bright golden lines across fresh lumber and old floorboards that had survived half a century of storms. By 7 a.m., the property was moving again, not with the chaos of emergency repairs, with rhythm, purpose, precision. The outside shell now stood stronger than it had in decades. New roof, fully framed porch supports, cured overnight west wall, reinforced new storm gutters stacked in the yard, insulated windows waiting for install. Now came the heart of the house, the inside. Roman stood in the living room with Hank Miller, Boone, and 2 Finnish carpenters from town. Hank unfolded the interior plans across Caleb's old dining table. "We restore original layout," Hank said, "but modernize the support lines, wiring, plumbing, and insulation." Roman nodded. "Keep Caleb's bones." Hank smiled. "That's exactly the plan." Evelyn stood near the doorway, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, listening in disbelief. No one had asked her what color paint she wanted in 36 years. Now men were discussing crown trim cabinet finishes, hardwood restoration, fireplace stone stormproofing. Her house wasn't just being saved, it was being loved back to life. The first emotional moment came in the hallway. 2 brothers carefully peeled away old wallpaper damaged by the ceiling collapse. Behind it, hidden beneath 50 years of faded floral paper, was pencil writing on the original drywall. Boone called out, "Prez!" Roman walked over. So did Evelyn. On the wall, written in Caleb's unmistakable block letters, were the words, "For Evelyn, first winter in our forever home." December 1972, Evelyn covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes instantly. She remembered that night. Snow outside. Caleb grinning like a boy while he finished the hallway paneling. He told her he wanted the house itself to remember them. Now it had. For 54 years. Roman looked at the crew. "No drywall over this," the carpenter nodded. "We frame it in glass." Evelyn turned toward Roman. "You'd really keep that?" He looked at the message again. "This house tells his story." That line hit her deeply, because it was true. Every repair now wasn't just construction. It was storytelling. By noon, the kitchen was transformed. The old cabinets had been carefully removed, only for Hank to discover something better behind them. Solid pine shelves Caleb built directly into the wall frame, still sturdy, still level, still stronger than most modern cabinetry. Hank laughed under his breath. "Guy built everything like a bunker." Roman ran his hand across the wood grain. Caleb's craftsmanship was everywhere. The chapter wasn't rebuilding over him. They were rebuilding around him, preserving what still carried his hands. Evelyn stood by the sink, tears in her smile. "He always said cheap wood was an insult to future winters." Boone laughed. "That sounds exactly like Caleb." For the first time, the house echoed with shared laughter instead of storm wind. Then, Roman moved to the fireplace. This part mattered most. The salvaged cedar porch beam with CM plus EM 1972 carved underneath had been cut, polished, and mounted above the stone mantel. Centered, protected. The soul of the old porch now became the heart of the new living room. Evelyn touched the carved initials gently. It felt impossible. Yesterday, this beam was half rotten in mud. Today, it stood polished above the fire Caleb once sat beside. Roman watched her reaction, then quietly said, "Legacy should be visible." That line would stay with her forever. Outside, the town kept arriving. Now it wasn't just curiosity, it was contribution. The diner owner brought lunch for 50. The high school woodshop class delivered hand-built nightstands. A florist brought fresh white lilies for the new porch rail. The whole county had shifted around the founder's widow. By mid-afternoon, the local station aired a second segment, The House. The founder built Rises Again that brought even more people, old riders, veterans, a retired judge who once knew Caleb, a nurse who remembered Evelyn bringing pies to the hospital every Christmas. The story had fully changed. No longer, old woman almost scammed now, town restores forgotten founder legacy. Roman knew that narrative shift mattered. This was no longer revenge. This was restoration, the most satisfying kind. Near sunset, the final interior moment hit hardest. Electricians restored power to the upstairs bedroom. The first warm light in years filled the room where part of the ceiling had collapsed just yesterday. Fresh paint, new beams, dry walls, a storm-proof window overlooking the fields. Evelyn stood in the doorway, unable to move. This was the room where Caleb once planned road trips, where he polished his boots, where he held her after long rides. And now it no longer smelled like rot and rain. It smelled like cedar, fresh linen, warmth, home. Roman stepped beside her. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we finish the memorial garden and the front sign." She looked at him. "Front sign?" A small smile touched his face. "The founder's house deserves its name back." Outside, floodlights turned on again as the final cruise worked into dusk. The Mercer house glowed warm against the darkening sky. For the first time in decades, it no longer looked like something waiting to die. It looked like something meant to outlast time, and tomorrow the whole county would see the final reveal. The sign went up at 8:12 the next morning. The whole property had gone quiet to watch it. Roman stood near the front gate with Boone, Hank Miller, and 6 brothers holding the cedar post frame steady while the county woodshop teacher and his students carefully lowered the carved plank into place. Fresh cedar, hand-burnished edges, black lettering burned deep into the grain. When it settled into the brackets, the morning sun hit it just right. The Mercer house, built 1972, restored by the Brotherhood. Evelyn stopped 3 steps down the new porch and simply stared. Her hand rose to her mouth. The tears came before she could stop them. Yesterday there had been no porch, no straight roofline, no stable walls, no certainty the house would survive another storm. Now the front of the property looked stronger than it ever had. Fresh white porch rail, storm-proof windows gleaming in the sun, rebuilt cedar steps, flower boxes under each front window, polished brass porch light, the new sign standing proud at the gate. For the first time since Caleb died, the house had a future. But Roman wasn't finished, not even close. At the far edge of the yard, near the old oak tree Caleb planted the year they moved in, a second crew had been working since dawn. Stone pavers, fresh soil, white gravel, a wrought iron bench. By the time Evelyn made it down the steps, the memorial garden was ready. She stopped dead when she saw it. At the center stood a waist-high granite marker. Simple, elegant, strong. The inscription read, "Caleb Mercer Founder, First County Charter." He built more than a club. He built home. Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. Roman stepped beside her quietly, ready in case they did. She reached out and touched the stone. Cold, solid, real. For 36 years, Caleb had existed only in old photographs, a ring, fading stories, her memory. Now the land itself remembered him. The town would remember him. The younger brothers would remember him. And when storms came, they would pass a stone that told them exactly whose road they still rode. Evelyn's voice cracked. "He would have loved this tree." Roman looked up at the oak branches moving in the wind. "He planted it, didn't he?" She nodded. "The same week he built the porch." Roman smiled softly. "Then this is exactly where it belongs." By noon, the memorial ride began. Not a funeral procession, not grief, honor, the kind only Brotherhood understood. Nearly 60 Harleys lined the county road, chrome flashing under clear skies, the entire current chapter. Veteran riders from neighboring charters, men in their 70s who had ridden with Caleb in the early years, young prospects who had only heard his name in clubhouse stories. And now they were all here. Roman stood before them, the founder's ring secured in the glass memorial case mounted inside the chapter lead truck. His voice carried across the assembled engines. "Today we ride for the man who built this road before any of us touched it." The brothers responded with a unified roar of engines. The sound shook the fields. Evelyn stood beside the Mercer sign, one hand over her heart. This wasn't fear anymore. This was pride. The convoy rolled out slowly. Harley's first contractor trucks behind Hank's van, the chapter truck carrying the founder ring, finally Evelyn in the passenger seat of Roman's black pickup. As they rode through town, people came outside. The diner staff stood on the sidewalk clapping. Kids from the school waved handmade signs. Veterans removed their caps. Even Deputy Collins stood outside the sheriff's office and nodded as the convoy passed. The whole county now understood. This wasn't about bikers. This was about loyalty outliving death. The route ended at the original clubhouse garage, the same brick building Caleb helped turn into the chapter's first home in 1971. Roman led Evelyn inside. The place had been transformed overnight. At the far wall stood the black steel founder display. The ring rested beneath glass, Caleb's name engraved beneath it in silver. Around it now hung old founder photographs. Caleb's original leather gloves, the black and white garage picture Frank had brought, the first charter map, Mason's recovered silver star medal beside it. Roman looked at Evelyn. This stays here so every generation remembers who built the first wall. She nodded through tears. For the first time, letting go of the ring no longer hurt, because it wasn't lost. It had become immortal. That evening, the convoy returned to the Mercer property at sunset. The restored farmhouse glowed warm gold beneath the evening sky. Porch lights on, fresh paint gleaming, flower boxes already blooming, the oak tree casting long shadows over the memorial garden. Roman helped Evelyn out of the truck. She looked at the house, at the sign, at the garden, at the brothers gathered quietly in the yard, and finally whispered the line everyone there would remember. It feels like Caleb finally came home for good. The sunset hit the porch windows, warm, golden, almost like the house itself was answering her, and Roman knew only one thing remained. Tomorrow, they would give her the keys to a future stronger than any storm. Roman placed the new house keys in Evelyn Mercer's hand just as the first snow of winter began to fall. Not a storm, not destruction, just soft white flakes drifting across the rebuilt porch Caleb once dreamed into existence. For a moment, nobody spoke. The entire yard stood still beneath the pale morning sky. 60 Harleys lined along the county road, contractor trucks parked near the new cedar fence. Townspeople gathered beside the Memorial Garden brothers, standing shoulder to shoulder near the porch steps. The Mercer house sign glowing fresh beneath a dusting of snow. Evelyn stared at the keys resting in her palm. Brass, heavy, warm from Roman's hand. Real. Her fingers trembled. Yesterday she had nearly traded Caleb's ring for $5 because she thought everything he built was about to collapse. Now she was holding the keys to a home stronger than the day they first moved in. Roman's voice came low beside her. Storm-proof roof, reinforced beams, new wiring, new plumbing, foundation reset. This place will outlive every man standing in this yard. Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes brimmed instantly. No fear now, no desperation, only gratitude so deep it almost hurt. She turned toward the house. The new porch boards didn't creak. The front door swung open smooth and solid. Warm light spilled across the steps. Inside, every room glowed, the restored cedar beam above the fireplace. The framed hallway message Caleb left in 1972. Fresh pine shelves in the kitchen, the upstairs bedroom now bright and safe. The house no longer felt repaired. It felt whole. It felt loved. It felt like Caleb. The entire county followed her inside for the final reveal, not crowding, not intruding, witnessing. The diner crew stood in the kitchen smiling through tears. Hank Miller ran a hand proudly over the restored cabinet line. Deputy Collins quietly removed his hat near the fireplace. Boone stood beneath the salvaged beam and whispered. Caleb would have approved. Roman stayed near the doorway, watching Evelyn take it all in. She moved slowly through the rooms, touching. The glass-framed message in the hallway, the polished mantel beam, the rebuilt stair rail, the new storm windows overlooking the fields. Then she stopped in the living room. The fire crackled beneath Caleb's initials. Snow drifted softly outside. For the first time in 36 years, winter no longer felt like a threat. It felt beautiful. Her voice came soft. I thought I was burying him when I took that ring to the pawn shop. The whole room fell silent. Roman looked toward the founder display photo now mounted above the fireplace beside the old garage picture. Then back at Evelyn. No, he said quietly. His eyes moved across the restored home. You brought him back. That line broke the room. Even Boone wiped his eye, because everyone knew it was true. The ring hadn't been sold. It had returned Caleb to the chapter, the town, his home, his widow, the future. Later that afternoon, Roman led the brothers outside one final time. The snow had begun settling lightly over the memorial garden beneath the oak tree. The granite stone stood untouched, the Mercer House sign gleamed at the road, and in the chapter truck parked beside the gate, the founder's ring waited in its permanent display case for the return ride to the clubhouse. Roman turned to the gathered men. Every new patch who comes through our doors sees that ring first. The younger riders straightened. Good. They needed to understand. This story wasn't just about justice, it was about memory, and what brotherhood owed the people who carried it when everyone else forgot. Roman's gaze shifted to Evelyn standing on the porch, wrapped in a warm coat, safe, home. Caleb built the first charter, Roman said. His widow protected the last symbol of that beginning through 36 winters. He let that sink in. Today we make sure she never faces another one alone. A low rumble of agreement rolled through the brothers, not loud, absolute. That was the final oath. As sunset approached, the convoy prepared to leave. Harleys roared one by one to life. Chrome reflected orange fire across the snow. The sound rolled over the fields like something ancient and alive. Roman climbed onto his bike last. Before putting on his gloves, he looked once more toward the porch. Evelyn stood there beneath the warm porch light, the house glowing behind her, the oak tree moving gently in the wind, the sign at the gate standing proud. Everything Caleb built now stronger than ever. She raised one hand. Roman nodded back. No words needed. Some endings were too complete for words. The convoy pulled away slowly. Engines fading down the county road, not leaving ruin behind, leaving permanence, legacy, home. Evelyn remained on the porch until the last taillight disappeared beyond the fields. Then she looked up at the rebuilt roof, at the windows glowing warm against the snow, at Caleb's initials above the fire through the living room glass. And finally, she whispered the last line of the story. You kept your promise, Caleb. The house stood us back up. The porch light burned warm into the winter night, and this time, no storm in the world could take it from her.